and welcome back to the WPT Heads Up Championship, sponsored by Poker King. It was a 25K buy-in 32-player bracket. We are down to the end, basically, and nice of you to drop by just in time, Kevin Ravachau. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jamie. How are you?
Great. Awesome that you got to play this event. Heartbreaking that you're not still in it, but I'm happy to have you in the booth. I've never gotten to commentate with you before. How's it going? Are you sad not to be in Cabo?
Yeah, as I was watching that intro sequence, I was trying to decide if I was more jealous of the people still in or the people who are just at Cabo right now. It looks incredible. Yeah.
It's been really great. And also, the people who are still in have been having a fair bit of fun as well. You could tell by all the sunburns.
Yeah,
There have been quite a few
definitely.
lobsters walking around playing this event. But yeah, getting to the action we have for today, you see the bracket is filling out nicely. The first match we're going to cover is Limitless versus Chris Kruk, which is just, it's all killers left. Despite people saying, there's some soft spots in the field, the people who got through are all just elite players. So it should be just amazing following this match today. But yeah, we'll have Limitless versus Kruk. We'll cover their whole entire match. And then I believe Greenwood versus Dan Smith is next, followed by Ivy Chidwick and Antonius versus Stefan. So, I'd like to just know your take, since you're really, really in the thick of it in Heads Up, have way more experience than I would have in being able to figure out who's the favorite in this field. But do you have any guesses?
Yeah, it's really hard to say who's going to be the outright favorite. I mean, kind of like you said, a lot of the best players are still in there. I think it's pretty cool that you have, I mean, for me, almost like a wild card in Ivy and Antonia still being in the field, like obviously top poker minds, but not really the same generation of player as some of these, more online specialists, heads up specialists, people from the games that I'm a little more familiar with. Yeah, it's tough to say. I'm really interested in the Chris Kruk versus Limitless match. I think that the winner of that one is going to be pretty hard to beat.
And it is interesting that it shook out that way with like two just really fierce online guys, and then two of the kind of old school live pro guys facing off. It's interesting how that bracket shook out like that. But we just missed the graphic, but it was a $400,000 is first prize. They're just giving 50% to first, no big deal. 200K second prize, and third and fourth will each receive $100,000. And then here's a preview. We're gonna have Dan Smith versus Sam Greenwood as soon as the Limitless and Kruk match is over. That should be pretty cool. Big fan of both these guys. Dan Smith definitely having a more chill kind of event than I bet others have been. He was having some drinks with JRB and, just hanging out. But he's the Double Up Drive charity founder, has raised over $18 million for charity. He holds some mean backyard concerts and is quite the pickleballer. Then we have Sam Greenwood. I think it's at currently 11th in the GPI rankings and 22.5 million in tournament earnings. So just two crushers. It's gonna be awesome to watch.
Yeah, Sam was a really tough opponent in my first round match. That was kind of an unfortunate draw for me. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Dan Smith's going to play against that level of competition, because I have a feeling, kind of like you said, he's maybe been a little chill, a little laid back, and his strategy might look a little different today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, let's get to the action, see how it shakes out.
I played JRB yesterday. I beat him 2-0. The blinds got high. I shoved 6-7 suited over his limp with King Jack, and I sucked out. He was like visibly pretty tilted. Granted, it was like a slightly bad beat, and then this second match, he clearly wasn't there mentally, and he made a few mistakes. He was just playing sloppy. It is hard to come back from when you're down 0-1 for sure. Yeah, and I was able to win with the clean 2-0 sweep. Yeah, sometimes you can look at somebody and you can tell how the match is going, and I think Doug was aware that JRB was getting waxed right there, but he wanted to twist the knife a little bit. Generally, I assume everything Doug does is deliberate. I am playing Sam Greenwood today. I've been competing with him for many years. He is a great no-limit player. I don't think he's super experienced heads up, but a very, very tough and well-established player, and I imagine he's putting in some work for the match. Like, we're playing for a lot of money. I watched Sam play Alex yesterday. At least I watched the first of the two. I am very impressed with how Alex played. She came up with some great bluffs. The main thing I tried to really get her to take away was be aggressive and don't fold too much, and I think she orchestrated that plan great. She got Sam to fold top pair of aces with a backdoor flush draw when she put in a big re-raise. She generally played really good. Sam happened to win, but Alex put herself in a position where if the cards went her way, she could have won, which is really all you could hope for. Matches versus, say, a topic very experienced no-limit player like Sam are going to be different than when you're playing someone who's less experienced. In like the first two matches, I was really playing the player and trying to get away with as much as I could. Against Sam, I expect both of us to just try to play our strategy to the best of our ability, and we're just going to see how that goes. There won't be as much I know, he knows type thing, and we're just going to be trying to play good cards.
Matches, or did you do commentary and the other stuff?
I did a couple. You have cards, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I just got the table up. I'm gonna turn this right in.
Commented on a few matches.
So we're getting right into the action.
I mean, it's
try
been
not
very
to talk
windy.
over what they're saying.
Yeah, it looked kind of overcast when I saw it out the window yesterday.
See, Kevin, there's nothing good about Cabo.
Apparently,
It's overcast,
we are
there's
in
wind.
Cabo, you can't swim because the riptide is so strong.
Oh, wow.
I do still think I'd rather be Dan Smith still in Cabo than Sam Greenwood still in remote.
I think just in general.
It's kind of a weird place to play. I guess they've got two levels, it doesn't matter.
Oh shit. the slider
Misclick right off the bat.
Disappeared for a moment, but I got the bet in.
Yeah, I was going to say, this
Do you think
isn't
he was
like
trying to go 120%?
Crazy size.
I actually don't think his action was that much different than he intended. Maybe just slightly too small, actually.
Oh, wow. So he was reacting to almost not getting the bet in time, not reacting to the size he chose.
I suspect so. A big turn bet is pretty normal. Nothing too scary about this board. It's very big river bet, obviously. His hand is worth it, at least.
I mean, I don't think I can fold.
Oh. Right away. What do you think of Sam Greenwood's call? Is that he's so funny. You think thumbs down?
I think he was convinced not so much by the fact that he had an ace, but that he had an ace and the six. Most people, I think, in Dan's position would not be bluffing the river with the six of clubs. It's not so great to bluff your missed flush draws.
Where you could swim, so I don't know if it. But like we just came in and like, hey, definitely don't go in the water.
And yeah, also just having, of course, a blocker to the straight is great when Dan's betting very large and most likely saying that he has a straight on that board. So.
Your intuition seems correct that Dan has a completely different game plan. He said in his interview for this match than he did for the other two, where he said he was trying to feel out his players, maybe look for some more places to exploit. And it seems like this, maybe we're going to just see theoretical good play. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that just makes sense. I know he has some experience playing with Sam in high roller tournaments, but you just don't get heads up that often in a tournament. So I think it's unlikely. I mean, I don't know, but it's unlikely they've even played each other heads up before, as much as they have played in general. So yeah, it's always interesting to see what each player's interpretation of, like, optimal play is going to look like. I think we're likely to see someone lean in one direction or the other, like a little more aggressive or a little more passive, and we'll just see kind of who matches up better against who.
Interesting turn card for Greenwood, who picks up a gutter ball. Dan Smith still with
Yeah,
second pair.
Greenwood certainly could have led the turn, but I think it's wise on his part to recognize you don't just want to lead every single time you have some jack or some 10. You certainly want to check with some of these hands as well. It could be a dicey river for Sam. He might decide to bluff now. With 2 blockers to the straight, it wouldn't have surprised me to see Sam put in a really big river bet there, but he avoids disaster, I guess, for now.
That was close. I feel I hit the fold button high up and was dangerously close to hitting my smallest raise size. But I guess it wasn't. I guess it wasn't close.
Very often get a little, like, given I'm not used to the software, like when you call and the bets come in, it kind of looks like more money's going in.
Yeah. Well, then there's also the goofy thing with the like they pull in the bets immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to like sit there being like, how big is that?
So interesting to see Dan bet small on the flop with such a good hand. It's not always. I'll sometimes see players take a strategy where they just make a very large c bet. 2 broadways on the flop, very strong top pair. Certainly would have been reasonable to see Dan choose a bigger c bet size. The fact that he didn't with this hand makes me think that he just kind of uses the small size in most of the situations. And a pretty light call there from Sam on the flop with king high, no backdoor flush draw.
And I do have the chat open, you guys. Since we are doing a commentary with Kevin remote, there's like a 0.1 second delay, so it's going to be a little harder for me to keep up with the chat, trying to cover it this way. But every once in a while, especially on breaks, I'll check if you guys have questions. Especially for Kevin, because we didn't learn a whole lot about him, but maybe on breaks we'll interview you.
Yeah, I was certainly hoping to make it onto more broadcasts than, I understand why the highlight reel was my coverage in round 1, but yeah, not a lot of screen time for a whole lot of buy-in.
Yeah. It's tough when the field is like Phil Ivey, Tom Dwan. We were trying to choose feature matches. Like, I want to feature all of them, but then as soon as I say that, I'm like, I don't really I don't want to commentate 12 hours a day. We featured everything.
Very reasonable, yeah. Yeah, and there's some. I mean, to be fair, my match with Sam went 2 or 3 hours in total. There's some excellent players in this field who are out the door in 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so. So. Pretty interesting line from Dan. He checks behind the flop and then goes to a large delay c-bet size. And Dan is running extremely well thus far. But it is interesting. He's kind of saying like, oh, I'm not going to bet for thin value on this kind of board. I'm just going to bet big when I have like an ace or maybe a good queen. I think Sam plays his hand just very standard there.
And
One of
checks
the
his
interesting.
butterball over. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the interesting dynamics I remember, and I'm sure this has been talked about on other matches, but at some point, a lot of these players start to limp, depending on how short they get or how deep into the tournament it is. And yeah, I remember Sam was somewhat. A lot of players I think are doing it around 40 big blinds and lower. Sam, I think, introduced that to his game around 40 big blinds. I'm going to try not to like blow up too much of Sam's strategy on a on a stream because I did play him for a while, but I think that part at least is fairly visible. Really interesting spot for Dan here.
That was one of the interesting things about watching all these matches, how short everyone got and how much play they still had in their stack. Like less than 10 big blinds, there's just a lot of interesting decisions where it used to just be send it and pray.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the solutions for how to play those stack sizes are, oh, I like this play from Dan. This is, I think it's actually a little bit greedy, and I'm very curious to see if, I mean, I think Sam's just supposed to call. Or raise. He obviously has the option to continue bluffing as he has been. Wow. He just folds. Yeah, I think that was I think that was a fairly large misstep by Sam, and it might not look it, to fold to a bet with queen high when you don't improve. But that actually is part of what makes Dan's play there on the river so cool, is that it really, really, really rarely needs to work to make it much better than checking.
This is not a solver thing. I don't think 1/11th pot is in most people's bet sizings. Is this just something cool Dan does because he's,
This so I would say it's a blend of the two. I would say that it's something that the solver will do very, very rarely in a controlled way. And I think Dan using it there with that hand is kind of a sign that he's saying like, oh, I like this play. It's pretty cool. I think it's reasonable here. And so he's kind of blurring that line between theory and practice. Interested to see what bet size Dan goes with here. He does think it's worth pot. I think this might be slightly large. But if Sam doesn't find enough traps on the turn, this could very well just be the right play. Cool part about the webcam, we get to see Sam just committing to the I'm not going to check raise bluff here. I'm just deciding if this is a gross call or a gross fold. Sam's feeling
down to
pretty
12
sticky.
big blinds this early, not feel good.
Oh, and it's very likely getting in here. Sam's either going to jam himself or he's going to limp jam. Yeah.
Have a good hand. Oh, not that good.
GG.
All right.
You want a minute, or you want to jump right into the next one?
We can go. I mean, it's not like I'm spent, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked JRB that yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that it goes
I mean,
from like 5-10 to 10-20
At the end.
So I wonder if like more important than like getting button first is it really just comes down to like not posting the big blind first at 20K level if it comes to that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess that's maybe. I thought it was weird that they did odd, or they did even.
Oh, your time bank is running away.
Yeah. I wondered if they did. I guess odd hands per level actually makes sense because otherwise the button keeps. I can see both sides because one is you give everyone the equal amount, but then giving somebody the button the first time every hand when you get shallow is also like kind of.
Yeah.
say that
No,
Dan
but I think you
Smith
want to go
has
odd.
probably
The button,
said the most
getting the
words of anyone on any
small
stream.
blind first every level will be like a really big advantage.
He was chilling with Aoki. They're just having fun, talking to each other. He was chilling with JRB. They're chatting. It's like they're playing $100 sit goes. And then I'm surprised that the money match is also like this. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that just shows someone who's been really comfortable for a long time in big games, right? I mean, just a ton of experience, ton of live experience, ton of high buy-in experience. Like it goes a long way, right? I was gonna say Sam min raised that hand, and I was curious if Dan would play it.
Bad fold too.
I mean, I guess it was getting
So painful.
whatever, like 2.2 big blinds or whatever. Or
Yeah.
not even 1.7.
Unless the slider gets me.
It's true.
Try to make it 1,800, make it 18,000.
So I would expect Dan to just start. This is another spot where I would usually be betting big, so he is sticking with the small C bet.
Will that change his decisions on later streets? Are there going to be more turnover bets then, or how do you adjust to be able to build pots with your good hands?
Yeah, it pretty much, like, his strategy is going to look a lot like what we see on maybe like a disconnect board, where it's like tiny bet on the flop, and then if you bet the turn, you go 120% pot, 150% pot, something quite big. Yeah, it's definitely necessary because not a lot of money goes into the pot for your good hands if the only thing you do is c bet a quarter pot or 33%, whatever that was. Everyone who's playing from Cabo, they are set up on the iPads, right? So nobody's using the PC or whatever. Yeah.
I don't know if you moved during Black Friday or whatever, but I lived in Mexico and the Wi-Fi was always an interesting hurdle. So I think they try to make it as easy as possible, have the app be the only thing running on the Wi-Fi, and then have, the webcam and stuff. Everything is separate. It seemed to work fine. They were trying to do PC at first, and there was, a whole bunch of issues.
Dan's giving this serious thought. I would think his hand is just a clear fold, but he might actually be a little bit suspicious about pot lead on a board pairing turn. Sam's kind of just saying like, I have trips, and I mean, ranges are very wide, so claiming on your first bet that I have trips, it's a big statement. I could see why Dan's a little skeptical there, but Sam did just have trips.
Chat wanted to know what you're cooking today, Kevin.
That's funny. I actually have a fairly big project in the works in the kitchen. I braised a bunch of beef yesterday, and I'm gonna make enchiladas today with it. I'm pretty
nice.
excited about that. Yeah, gonna get started on that right after this call.
If anyone wants to check it out, Kevin, what's your Instagram? Because you do have a nice looking Instagram with lots of good dishes.
Yeah, thanks. It's same as my Twitter. It's at krabichow, first initial, last name. Yeah, I saw that made it into the bio during pregame. I appreciate that. I actually kind of like I like that there's more to talk about than just the poker. I've learned to appreciate that
than they were the last time we raced. Like they're changing.
No, I've had this happen before. When you get the button, the first hand of a new blind level, they give you your like post flop bet sizes. So like you got like third part, half part, whatever, instead of just like, yeah.
Just a casual conversation as Dan Smith coolers his face off.
So looks like I was
early
wrong
blind
about
levels.
the small C betting thing. Dan comes out in a very good spot for it. Dan comes out with the pot sized C bet, so he is varying his sizing, just not the same way that I would, which doesn't make it bad or anything. It's just, it seems he's being a bit more selective about when to go big. And this is a really difficult spot for Sam. I think this is an opportunity to make a good fold, or at least to fold sometimes. And I think a lot of players make the mistake of never folding top pair here. It's one of the hardest things in heads up for people who don't play a lot of it is, like, you could go with the generic advice of like bluff a lot and never fold, but like it's tough to find like the good folds and then the close folds. So far Dan's been pretty impressive with that, I think. And yeah, Sam, just with no straight blockers, he just has to fold the river. So it's been hard for me to tell thus far if Dan has been misclicking his sizing pre and being really chill about it, or if he's using two different 3-bet sizes. And I'm inclined to think it's the latter, that he's using two different 3-bet sizes. But that's a very complicated strategy to try and play kind of on the fly with no randomizer, perhaps without. I mean, he's been practicing, I guess, in the live streets against MJ, right? Yeah. So that might be part of his overall game.
How do you think he breaks down which hands to use for which size?
Well, I can say kind of broadly, like if you think about the value region only, the really, really top hands, so like aces, kings, queens, ace, king suited, might be inclined to create this like smaller, more attractive size and induce a bit more action. And then the more vulnerable hands like ace, king offsuit, or ace queen offsuit or pocket tens might go for the very big size. I think that there's a lot of room to manipulate those variables, and as far as what you use for bluffs and what you use, as kind of your in-between hands, I actually don't really know what that solution looks like, but I can say pretty confidently, like the value thing, it would be, protection versus not so much protection. So this is a good, difficult bet size to play against. Wow, Sam, yeah, I think Sam correctly identified that was a close spot. He has a really good hand to consider calling. 2 blockers to a high pair, no blockers to cards that will bluff.
Finally got one of those right. Although I guess some of the folds could have been good too. I don't know.
Are we still
So
check
far,
raising our gutter balls, or is that not cool anymore?
he definitely could. He definitely could. I want to say it's a mix, because it is basically. He's going to have a lot of options as to what to check raise, but also, basically 3 high cards on the board are like ace and 2 pretty high middle cards. Pretty favorable board for Sam. A lot of Dan's best hands on this board are just going to 3-bet the big blind. So he's not going to be doing that much check raising just in general. So with whatever hand he gets, it wouldn't surprise me to just see him check call.
I gotta say, it's nice having Landon Tice in the chat because I can't really man the chat and ask questions to you, but he's literally answering all of them.
Awesome.
Kid loves poker.
Yeah, that's great. Landon's been working hard on his heads up game. Good person to have around for this thing.
Sure.
I have noticed, like, Sam, I don't think has really missed a button c-bet yet. Dan been doing a lot more checking behind on the flop. Always hard to say, if they're doing it too much or too little, because we're only seeing a couple of hands here. And very reasonable call by Dan on the turn here. Yeah, hard to say if they're doing too much or too little of it, but it definitely feels that Dan has a more developed check back strategy, and Sam is maybe just taking a little bit more of like automatic c-bet spots. Pretty reasonable fold there. It's another just like kind of awkward. Dan had that king 3 last time facing a small c-bet. He made kind of a close fold. This one again just looks kind of like a close. You could sort of go either way with it, but having a draw to the ace probably makes it good enough. I'm actually not sure of this one. Yeah, definitely on the 4 straight. We will see some small bets. Not too surprising to see Sam trying to sneak a little extra value with the 7 in his hand. Weak ace.
So what What kind of hands would have been a 3-bet there if not ace-10 off?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think ace-10 off probably is a 3-bet. It's at 60 big blinds. There's definitely that bit of awkwardness where you don't want to 3-bet a hand that's a little bit too weak and a little like worried about getting jammed on. But I think when you have an offsuit ace, that's not as much of a concern as when you have like queen 10 suited. If Sam had queen 10 suited, it wouldn't surprise me so much to see him flat, not wanting to get 4-bet jammed on. But when he has ace 10 offsuit, it's just kind of nice to protect his equity. He has 2 high cards. If he gets called, he just makes the best top pair on a lot of boards. I think it's just a value 3-bet for 60 big blinds. And maybe as you get much, much deeper, you can think about, not 3-betting it just because it's too thin.
And you picked queen 10 suited as one you'd like to flat. Is that for playability, that you're just going to have a lot of like semi-bluffs, flops, and good stuff like that?
Well,
I thought you were moving the score up because I saw you like move your hand forward really quickly.
Yeah, it is sort of for playability. It's I'm not so worried about how well my hand plays in single raise pot. But I'm basically pretty worried about if I 3-bet, a lot of the hands I'm crushing will fold. Say like queen 8 offsuit or 10x. Just weak queens, weak 10s. They're all in there pre-flop. They're going to fold to the 3-bet. And a lot of the hands that crush me will never fold. And then we might even get jammed on by like ace 5 offsuit. And we just have to fold.
All bad things.
So all bad things. It's mostly about the pre-flop interaction.
I don't know what Dan's smiling at, but I want to know what's going on inside his head right now. He's just smiling at his screen. He had a really funny spot the other. Oh, okay.
I wasn't hearing it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. He had a really funny spot the other day that against Aoki, where he made like 12 different faces, like whatever, like thinking, and then called with like 6-5 off or 7-6 off or something like that. And it was just funny because like he actually was like, "Do I call this? I don't know." Like, and he's just like, "Ah, all right." And it was just, I had said, I'm like, "Oh, he's obviously folding because he's making all these weird faces." I'm like, "Oh, never mind."
Just showing all of his emotion with no concern really. Just saying like, yeah, this feels gross. I want to call. Here's how it feels.
It is kind of weird to be playing online and have a webcam on you. So like I could see myself falling into that trap of just being like, doesn't matter how I look or what I'm doing or like any expressions, I'm playing online. And they're like, oh wait.
Yeah. Sam just going to have a pretty clear attempt to show down. I do wonder if Dan's going to try and bluff this type of hand. He's been pretty aggressive in general with the bottom of his range. And if it checks 3 times, I'd be a little surprised to see him not bluff. Although Sam might get a little greedy and try and block bet. No. Yeah, good check call from Sam. Dan's never going to bluff with queen high. Just a very good check call to lose the minimum against better pairs and get some bluffs. So I can't say for sure, but with Dan open folding the button at 40 bigs with, or 35 bigs with that hand, I think he's probably still not limping. Could be close, but it seemed like he didn't even consider a limp. And I think if he was playing a limping strategy, he would have at least took a second to consider it.
And you were saying earlier that you think at 40 big blinds and lower, it's reasonable to have a limping strategy from the button. You think his kicks in at 30 or something, or?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, I think a limping strategy is reasonable at all stack depths, but it's really, really important when 3-bet jamming starts to come into play. So that's kind of the mechanic, I think, that makes people start to limp at, say, 30 big blinds or 35 or 40, somewhere around the stack depth where if you just open raised everything, your opponent in the big blind would start 3-betting all in quite a lot.
When you say limping is reasonable at all stack depths, is it just that it's hard to implement a strategy that takes that into account? That's why people are not doing it?
I think it's just, well, yes, it's hard. Yes, that's a big part of it. But it also doesn't create a lot of EV. Like I've done a little bit of testing at like 60 big blinds and 100 big blinds, and even deeper than that to see like how much EV you're going to add to your strategy to either raise only, like raise or fold, or to mix limping and raising and folding. And it really doesn't become all that significant until you're down at like 50 big blinds, 40 big blinds, and lower. And I've recommended to people who are like less familiar with heads up to just play whatever comes most natural to them at like 60 big blinds and deeper, because it's more important you play your strategy well than it is that you choose one or the other.
This is actually something I've been interested in too. When someone's deciding to make their strategy very complicated, is this after learning a simpler strategy and getting really used to it and then being like, okay, I think that I can start creating more variables and whatever, or is it something that you think you have to go after right away?
Well, there Dan goes with the limp, so we can see that 30, I guess, is where he thinks about it. And pretty good hand for it. I think I personally would start with the simple strategy, learn it, feel good about it, then add variables. But you can certainly, I mean, there's different ways to go through that learning process. It sort of depends, where, like maybe if you're coming from another game, you can start with more complexity because maybe you've kind of got the pieces put together in a different format that would translate nicely. But if someone was starting fresh, like someone had never played the game before, yeah, I would try to start them as simple as possible and then add it, like just kind of keep adding layers.
Sorry, I'm making you coach me and the chat during this commentary, but I can't help myself.
It's what I do. It's what I like to do. It's no problem at all. These spots are always so interesting. I think, yeah, I mean, on monotone flops, both players are just going to have a really weak hand very often, and then occasionally a super, super strong hand. So you'll see people either playing a lot of checks, or a lot of very small bets, but usually just not a ton of aggression unless you've got like some of the worst hands ever or some of the best hands. So the king deuce, definitely a candidate for betting. I mean, just for bluffing at any stage here, king deuce was definitely a candidate, and pretty good check call from Sam on the flop. Like it's not always obvious. You have no pair, you have no heart, no straight draw. Like it's not obvious that this is supposed to check call. Dan does not have a snap decision, but this bet is a little bit, it's fairly affordable, I guess is the way that I'll put it. Yeah, not surprised to see him call.
What sizing were you expecting?
I think once the turn checks through, Dan is very often going to be playing
I'm
the
not sure
board.
if I'm right about this, but I felt like in my head I was all ready to go all in as my size, and then I thought I needed to do something different once the straight flush filled. Or like the potential straight flush.
I would guess it's not a factor, but also just using 100 and 1.3x are just totally cool too.
Yeah.
Cool when they can't hear our commentary, but they answer my question. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I
Doesn't
would
matter
have
about
expected
having
the all in.
pairs. It's just like having pairs on the board is good what you want.
So yeah, seems like Dan was kind of implying that neither of them had the best hands for putting all the money in, but for a pot size bet, kind of reasonable. Yeah, I just think that Sam has he raised versus limp, so he's going to have a lot of high cards in his range. Dan limped called, so he's going to have a lot of medium to low cards in his range. So it just seems fine for Sam to just go all in if he has like a king high flush or an ace high flush and a bunch of bluffs. It just seems reasonable to me. So Sam going for looks like about 3/4 spot, which I think is pretty good. He can still bet. It's very hard to make a pair on this board, so Dan's turn call is extremely standard. With the worst pair with the worst kicker, he still just has to continue any pair and a bunch of high cards as well. Interesting river spot. I mean, Sam should have a bunch of eights on the turn as well, but probably not as frequently as Dan. I think he's considering even a lead jam or lead pot. This is not going to work though. Maybe it works against it, and he's not. That's not the goal of his bet. He's not trying to make Sam fold a 3. He's trying to make him fold a missed flush draw. He's trying to make him fold pocket fives, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I knew the 4 was bad, but like obviously.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I was interested to see if Sam was going to try and check raise this hand. Seems like he is. I wonder if Dan ends up checking back just based on that time bank.
No good.
Or if it's a combination of the time bank and his hand not being that great. And it's a pretty common check raise spot when the flush comes in on the river. But Dan definitely, I mean, his hand was strong enough to bet at almost every stage, so. $15 big blinds definitely the exciting part. The way I play this stack depth is basically just we limp the button and go from there. There's not a whole lot of jamming. There's not a whole lot of min raising. I just limp the button and go from there. And then the big blind will do a lot of stuff. The big blind will do a lot of jamming, a lot of like 3x ISO raising. So I'd expect to see Dan continue, even though he's unpaired. He will beat all bluffs. And he is still drawing to a very good hand. And Sam, I think, is going to feel really obligated to bluff this hand, just trying to pick a size.
Going back to what you're saying with limping the button on that stack size and then all the stuff that your opponent's going to do in response to that, Dan was absolutely punishing Aoki. He ISO'd so many limps, it was insane. Basically, it won him the match.
Yeah, I saw some of that
it?
match.
Yeah.
And Aoki, I didn't catch every hand, but you know, I think I saw him, for example, limp fold the button with Jack 7 off, or limp fold the button with yeah, this is an example of where it gets really interesting. So Sam might flat here. Yeah. So I mean, it's very rare to see two premiums up against each other at the stack size, but both players have a lot of reason to induce. So that's exactly what they're doing. They just don't realize that, you know, they're both trapping. Nobody should have an ace in their hand when they take this line, unless they have pocket aces, like to limp and limp call. You would never do that with just an ace. You would be all in for 10 big blinds with just an ace in some fashion. Same for Dan. He would never induce, maybe with ace king suited and ace queen suited, like maybe a couple of really, really good aces, but for the most part, he's just going to jam versus the limp when he has an ace in his hand. So they both feel like they have the nuts right now, and they are playing accordingly. Dan might feel inclined to mix between jam and check. He just plays jam.
Chuckle of mutually wasting 3 minutes.
I've had a couple of those. Like you play a big tournament and it gets to blind versus blind. Really shallow as well. It plays very similar, and like both of us had aces, I think, and it's just like I limp, they 2.5x, I flat, comes like king high, check, like 1 big blind c bet, check raise to 3 big blinds, trap flat, like it just feels so ridiculous. So pretty interesting that Sam is raising 3.5x with an ace. He gets punished for it. Not to say that he can never make that play, but raise folding a hand that's good enough to jam yourself is a bit unfortunate. So yeah, the big blind's gonna raise versus limp with a lot of just like stone trash. And as the button, you really only want to be limp folding with your actual trash, with your weak offsuits, maybe like 9 deuce suited, like very, very weak suited hands. But yeah, you mentioned the Aoki match. I think he was folding some clear calls, basically. It's uncomfortable to play that stuff, to play like limp call with Jack 7 off. But that's just kind of the way you're supposed to play it.
Dan picked up on that so quickly and just punished. I think he even had, I want to say it was like 8 deuce suited or something one hand. Yeah, he was just taking every opportunity. And it was just really impressive to watch because just both of them navigating such short stacks, they got to a ridiculous level, like 10k, 20k or something like that. And just watching Dan take these like little bites out of his stack till it was like, yeah, it was just so important because I think Dan had even lost a couple all in, but he had stolen so much in between that he was able to come out ahead, and that made all the difference.
And I think the cool part,
I think you got it.
The cool part of these players kind of taking strategy post flop and adding those extra decision points just means that there's another opportunity for them to show off like how sharp they are. Like you know, when you, like you said, like when you used to play like 10 big blinds, you're in there or you're folding, like you just go all in or you fold. There's only so many really bad mistakes your opponent can make. It's like, oh, they folded like Jack 8 suited when they were supposed to call Jack 7 suited plus or something. Like, big deal. Like it doesn't do that much. But if you're consistently picking away, like you get post flop with trash you're not supposed to ever be in there with, and you can make them fold too much post flop as well. It's much bigger edge. So for 20 bigs, I would expect this gets in. Dan is not raising this hand with the intention of raise folding. He would be limping if he wanted to control the pot.
High cards? Oh yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Pretty funny. You know, elite players all the way down to recreational players, like, we all want the same thing. We want to sweat. You know, it's not, you become not a robot once the cards are on their back. You start begging the dealer for a card, you know?
I think especially in this environment, how can you not? I mean, maybe Sam would normally be playing more tables if it was his normal online tournament day, but this isn't exactly that. I think he's I don't think he's got 4 tables up on the iPad right now.
Yeah. I actually was wondering about that, because I feel like depending on, I mean, to some people this 25K buy-in is extremely significant and they're completely focused. And then for some people it's just, oh, it's another day. And I was like wondering, you know, what happens if Bobby's room is amazing and someone's like, I'm gonna go play that, I'm gonna fly back. You just never know.
Yeah, it's true. I imagine, like, I know Linus, for example, out in the first round, like I'm sure he had his computer, like he probably had the stars lobbies like ready to go and was just like, oh, this is so annoying. I can't play 200, 400 right now. Like I gotta finish this little 25K before I can play.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. I'd mentioned to you guys, chat, who's looking for Limitless Crook. We will be showing at least highlights from them. The coverage is going to be a little different today because we wanted to highlight as many of these matches as we could. We want to show you guys as much as possible since it's the money matches, but can't have a 12-hour day, so we're going to show you as much as we can. So stay tuned if you're looking for Limitless Crook.
So they're definitely a board you're going to see a lot more check raising on with the paired flop. So not surprising to see Dan finally getting a check raise in there. You know, another weak draw basically, but just paired flop, much better check raising spot. The other ace 9-8 two-tone, not as great of a check raising spot. So he's choosing his boards wisely. Pretty quick check behind with the pair of threes on the turn. I'm surprised he didn't. Again, just like not really thinking about betting for protection in these spots. But here, willing to go for value in a very similar spot to that 9-5 from earlier. And I think he might have just maybe picked up a little something. Really does make me think that slow check on the previous one convinced Dan to avoid a value bet that he would otherwise make.
That's so interesting you're saying that, because I feel like it's hard for the elite players to say, yes, there are timing tells, yes, there are other considerations besides
Please.
solves, but you seem to consider it.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider it heavily, and I wouldn't consider it in like, I wouldn't consider it as much, say, in an online environment with multi-tabling and no webcams. Like when there's more certainty about the fact that that time could be unrelated.
I don't have somebody to give me water.
But here it's like, you know, Sam's fully focused on his iPad. He's got nothing else going on. You can see that. So when he takes extra time, it's for a reason.
Sam is low-key funny. I didn't know that. He's had some very funny comments.
He's hilarious.
Do you bet half pot? 12 to 20, 60%.
So yeah, bigger C bet there from Sam, wanting extra protection on that board. And Dan maybe would have thought about something versus a small C bet, but nothing to be done there. And I do wonder now, I mean, we've seen him raise 9 deuce, we've seen him raise 9-3, now he checks the 9 deuce. It could be he has kind of an impromptu randomization method, but it could also just be it's like, I've gone a little too hard. let's take one off.
A funny way to randomize. You look at your opponent, you're like, they look pretty over it. Good time not to blast.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty tricky spot. 9 of diamonds, no showdown value, hard not to bluff at least sometimes. But definitely that, you know, the king making the straight on the river definitely going to be better for Sam's range. Dan's not going to be bluffing with king high very often on the turn at all, so. Interesting. Would have thought that I would see Sam. I might be misinterpreting like the fast call from Sam. It doesn't necessarily mean he didn't consider 3-betting. It could just mean he had already randomized a passive number before, you know, like he could have already decided that this was going to be a passive action situation for him, either based on his suits or time or whatever. Pretty sneaky thin value double barrel here from Dan. It's going to feel pretty good about
King, queen.
winning on the 7 of diamonds.
No.
Interesting. Didn't really expect to see Dan make any moves with just 8-6, no diamond. He does have 2 overs to the 5. This does have a bit more playability than a hand like, I don't know, 10-7, for example. He gets a really good turn card.
Is that a spot that you expect Greenwood to be betting often? Is it for protection with his sixes? Just he's vulnerable to the river.
Yeah. I think Sam's double barrel is just really good. I think it's going to be pretty much the only play with sixes there. I mean, Dan floated with 8-6 high. He's obviously going to be floating with all sorts of high cards, and of course, a 5 is way too strong to consider folding for 2 streets. It's sometimes going to call 3 streets, but I think Sam's just making like a 2-street value play. Thinks the 8 is pretty safe. You might see him check on like a king or something, like a high card that Dan would connect with frequently, but we're not going to see him check behind on a low card. I think a lot of those check down pots where Sam has tried to make a check raise, you know, maybe not looking so successful just because Dan did find the check behind, but I think he's choosing very good cards to do it with. Just he has all the good cards in his hand. He's blocking a lot of the stuff he's trying to get called by. The overwhelmingly likely outcome if he was to do something different is just he would bet and Dan would fold. So same result. I've had a lot of monotone flops.
I've noticed that as well.
These are quite a small. They're rare. I think it's like 1%. I actually don't know percentages like that, but I think it's like 1% or maybe less.
That seems like something. Do you remember Antonio Esfandiari when he do coverage? He'd be like, 12% of the time, this card will be. He would say he would know what percentage of the time a flop is monotone for sure. I'm going to call him right now.
I feel like that's the type of math you just like, if you only ever played No Limit Hold'em, you would just never bother to learn it. But maybe if you used to play like draw or something, like you would actually know that stuff.
I guess it would be useful in knowing what to study. If it's something that happens 1% of the time, you're like, all right, I'm not starting with Pio with this. Get to that later.
That's actually the only reason I know it is because I have a friend who takes tournament study very seriously, and he like heat mapped out how frequent all the different situations are, and it was like, okay, like in position versus big blind, this is like, I don't know, 5% of all hands that are dealt, and like every other category of hand is like less than 1% or something. So it's like you should only study it.
That's amazingly valuable.
Yeah. So it's same for monotone or like trips or paired or whatever, like combine all of them. And I think it's like 5% of the game tree. So it's like, okay, you could spend 5% of your time working on trips and monotone and paired, but you should spend 95% of your time on just regular looking boards.